Aries, before we go any further, let me ask you something. Why did this message find you right now? Take a breath. Slow it down. Because this isn't random, and deep down you already know that. There's someone in your family you've been thinking about more than you admit. Someone tied to a choice you've been avoiding. A name. A memory. A letter that keeps echoing in your chest. The universe isn't shouting today, it's whispering. And Aries, it's asking you to listen. If you've been feeling torn between loyalty and truth, between staying quiet and choosing yourself, this message is for you. Stay with me. And if your intuition starts reacting, don't ignore it. We're about to step into something that changes how you see everything. Trust yourself. Aries, I want you to imagine something for a moment. It's late. The world is quieter than usual. And for once you're not running, you're just here. Listening. Because messages like this don't arrive when life is loud. They find you in between. Between decisions. Between old roles you've outgrown and a version of yourself that's still learning how to breathe freely. This isn't a coincidence. And you don't need anyone to convince you of that. There's a reason this reached you now, not yesterday, not 6 months from now. Now, you've been standing at the edge of something emotional for a long time. Especially when it comes to family. You've carried feelings that were never fully spoken. Expectations that were never truly yours. Loyalties that slowly asked you to disappear in order to keep the peace. And Aries, you tried. You really did. But something inside you has shifted. Quietly. Almost invisibly. You're closing a chapter that demanded silence. And you're stepping into a phase that asks for honesty. Not rebellion. Not conflict. Just truth. This moment you're in, it's a crossroads. The end of an emotional cycle that shaped you, and the beginning of something more grounded, more adult, more yours. You're not becoming colder, you're becoming clearer. And clarity can feel lonely at first. You may notice it in small ways. The way certain conversations suddenly feel heavy. The way old dynamics no longer sit right in your chest. The way your body reacts before your mind does. That's growth, not guilt. You weren't meant to stay the same forever, even for the people you love. What's happening now isn't about breaking bonds, it's about redefining them. From a place of strength, not obligation. And if you've been feeling like you're being quietly pulled forward, like something unseen is guiding your timing, that's because it is. There's an alignment happening between who you've been and who you're ready to become. You don't need to rush it. You don't need to explain it yet. Just notice how this message landed. Notice where your breath paused. Notice which words stayed with you. Because the universe doesn't interrupt your life without intention. It taps you gently when you're ready to hear something deeper. And Aries, what comes next isn't distant, it's close. Closer than you think. It involves someone woven into your story. Someone familiar. Someone whose presence has shaped more than you realized. So stay with me. Not because you need answers right away, but because you're finally ready to see the truth clearly. We're only just beginning to open the door. Alright, stay right here with me. Aries, there's something I want to speak to you about gently. Not as a warning, not as a prediction, but as a truth you've already felt moving quietly inside you. This part of the story isn't really about a name. Not on the surface. It's about a thread, an invisible thread that's been wrapped around your life for a very long time. The letter A is only a doorway, a symbol your intuition recognizes before your mind does. It could be a first name you've spoken 1,000 times. A nickname that still carries weight in your chest, or even a letter buried in a last name you don't say out loud very often anymore. But what matters isn't the letter itself. It's the bond attached to it. This is a karmic connection, the kind that doesn't arrive gently. The kind that shapes you through contrast, not comfort. This person has had a hand in who you became, in how you learned to react, in what you believed you were allowed to want, and in what you learned to suppress in order to belong. You didn't imagine that influence. And you weren't weak for feeling it so deeply. With Aries energy, bonds like this burn hot. They teach through friction, through closeness that feels both familiar and heavy at the same time. You may have noticed how conversations with this person leave you tired. Not angry, just drained in a way that doesn't make sense anymore. Or how decisions involving them always seem to cost you something internally. Your peace, your voice, your sense of direction. That's not failure. That's awareness arriving. Because karmic bonds aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to wake you up. And what I feel around you now is not conflict. It's completion. The energy between you and this person has reached its edge. Not because anyone is wrong, but because you're no longer vibrating at the same frequency. You've grown, not louder, deeper. And when that happens, old dynamics begin to feel tight. Like clothes you outgrew without noticing the moment it happened. This doesn't mean rejection. It means evolution. You're being asked to see this connection clearly, without nostalgia blurring the truth, without guilt rewriting the past. Just clarity. And clarity doesn't rush, it settles. If your body has been giving you subtle signals, a tightening in the chest, a pause before responding, a sense of emotional distance you can't explain, that's your inner compass recalibrating. You're not abandoning anyone. You're simply no longer abandoning yourself, and that matters. This karmic bond did its job. It taught you strength through tension, identity through resistance, self-respect through discomfort. Now something new is beginning to breathe underneath all of that. Not separation, but redefinition. And as you sit with that truth, as you allow it to land softly, instead of forcing conclusions, you'll notice something else rising. A quieter knowing. A steadier sense of self. A readiness you didn't have before. Because once you recognize a karmic bond for what it is, you stop fighting it, and you start learning from it. And that understanding, that gentle shift in perception, is exactly what's opening the next layer of this story. So keep listening, not with fear, but with curiosity, because what follows this realization is where your real freedom begins to take shape. Stay with me, Aries. Don't pull away from this part. This is where the story gets honest. Because if we're being real, you felt different for as long as you can remember. Even before you had words for it. Even before you knew what intuition was. As a child, you noticed things others missed. Tones, silences, the space between what people said and what they meant. You asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. You felt emotions that didn't belong to your age yet. And somewhere along the way, you realized something quietly painful. You didn't quite fit. Not because you were broken, but because you were early. Early to feel, early to see, early to understand that the rules everyone else followed didn't fully make sense to you. So they gave you labels. Difficult, stubborn, too intense, too sensitive, too much. And maybe you tried for a while to soften yourself. To shrink your reactions, to play the role that kept the peace, but your spirit never agreed to that contract. Inside, you always knew there was more to you than the version they could understand, and that knowing created distance. Not loud distance, quiet distance. You could be in the same room and still feel alone, still feel unseen, still feel like you were translating yourself into a language no one spoke back to you. That's what it means to be the black sheep. Not rebellion for attention, but truth that doesn't blend in. And Aries, here's the part I want you to hear clearly. You were never wrong for that. You weren't difficult. You were awake. Awake in a family system that preferred comfort over truth. Awake in environments that rewarded sameness, not authenticity. Awake before the people around you were ready to grow. That kind of awareness can feel isolating, especially when it starts so young. You may have learned to be strong too early, independent too soon, self-reliant before you should have had to be. And while others leaned on the structure of family, you leaned inward. You learned to read the room, to anticipate reactions, to survive emotionally by becoming observant. That doesn't make you cold, it makes you resilient. But resilience often comes with a quiet grief. The grief of not being fully known. The grief of loving people who couldn't meet you where you were. And that grief doesn't mean there's something wrong with your heart. It means your heart is deep. What you're feeling now, this stirring, this reflection, this subtle exhaustion with old dynamics, isn't rebellion resurfacing. It's maturity arriving. You're no longer trying to prove yourself. You're no longer trying to explain your nature. You're simply honoring it. And that's when the tension shifts. That's when old family roles start to crack. Not because you're attacking them, but because you're no longer playing them. You're stepping out of the shadow of misunderstanding and into a clearer sense of who you are. And as you do, as you stand more firmly in your truth, something begins to surface. A realization that doesn't come with anger, but with clarity. A moment where you see the past for what it was and yourself for who you've always been. And that realization, that gentle reclaiming of self, is exactly what prepares you for what comes next. So take a breath here. Let this land. Because the story isn't about who didn't understand you. It's about who you're becoming now that you finally do. And that understanding, that quiet strength forming inside you, is about to change how everything else unfolds. Stay here with me, Aries. This is the moment where the air changes. There's a word that's been hovering around your life lately. You may not have spoken it out loud, but you've felt it. Deep, quiet, heavy in a way that doesn't ask for drama. I'm sorry. Not the kind that fixes things. Not the kind that rewinds time. But the kind that closes a door without slamming it. You didn't arrive at this feeling suddenly. It came slowly. In pauses that lasted longer than conversations. In moments where you realized you were explaining yourself again, and still not being met. At first, you tried to be patient. You told yourself things would shift if you just stayed softer, more understanding, more flexible. But something inside you began to resist. Not loudly, not angrily, just firmly. You started to feel it in your body. That quiet heaviness when you thought about the future. That subtle ache when you imagined staying exactly where you were. And that's when the truth arrived. Not as a sentence, but as a knowing. I cannot keep doing this. Not like this. Not anymore. This isn't a rejection of love. It's a refusal to abandon yourself. What's ending now isn't a relationship alone. It's an agreement you made long ago to stay silent about your needs. To accept half understanding. To carry emotional weight that was never meant to be yours alone. And Aries, that agreement has expired. You may feel grief. That's natural. Endings that matter always carry tenderness. But notice what's missing. There's no panic, no chaos, just clarity. Because this chapter didn't collapse. It completed itself. You didn't fail here. You fulfilled the lesson. This connection has gone as far as it can go in its current form. No amount of effort will return it to what it was. And no amount of guilt should keep you trying. That doesn't mean there was no love. It means love has evolved into something quieter, something that requires space instead of closeness. And space does not mean loss. It means honesty. You are allowed to outgrow dynamics that once protected you. You are allowed to choose peace over repetition. You are allowed to say goodbye without needing a villain. This ending is not punishment, it's preparation. There is a reason it feels calm instead of dramatic. A reason your heart feels heavy but steady. A reason your breath doesn't catch the way it used to. You are ready. Ready to stop negotiating with your truth. Ready to stop hoping for versions of people that no longer exist. Ready to walk forward without dragging the past behind you. And here's something important. This goodbye does not erase what was meaningful. It simply releases what no longer fits. That is not loss. That is wisdom. As you allow this chapter to close gently, without rushing, without justifying, without reopening old wounds, you'll notice something subtle beginning to rise. A sense of safety you haven't felt in a long time. A quiet confidence. A steadiness that doesn't need approval. Because once an ending is honored instead of resisted, something new can finally find you. Not immediately, not loudly, but steadily. And that is where the light begins to change. Stay close, Aries. This is where the story softens and strengthens at the same time. After an ending settles, there's often a quiet fear. A question that doesn't speak but waits. What if I'm alone now? But listen to me. You are not. There's a presence around you in this moment. Not loud, not dramatic, steady. Protective in a way that doesn't interfere, only guides. It shows up when you pause instead of panic. When you feel supported without knowing why. When something unseen seems to step in just before you lose your footing. That's not imagination. That's alignment. You've been watched over more than you realize. Especially during the moments you thought you had to be strong by yourself. Especially when you chose truth over comfort. Especially when you finally decided not to disappear to keep others comfortable. This is what protection feels like when it's real. It doesn't stop challenges. It walks you through them without letting you break. You're being reminded of something important now. Choosing yourself was never a mistake. It was a return. You were never meant to live at war with your own values. Never meant to trade your inner fire for approval. Never meant to earn love by shrinking. And the moment you stopped doing that, the moment you honored what felt right, instead of what felt expected, support stepped closer. You may feel it as calm where there used to be anxiety, as certainty where there used to be second guessing, as a deeper trust in your own timing. This is the shift, from fearing disconnection to trusting your own path. You don't need to justify who you are becoming. You don't need permission to grow. You don't need to carry the emotional weight of an entire family system on your back anymore. Your integrity is enough. There is a quiet intelligence guiding you now. one that nudges instead of pushes, one that reminds you to pause before reacting, one that reassures you when the old fear tries to resurface. And when doubt creeps in, when the past whispers that you are selfish for choosing yourself, notice how quickly something steadier answers back. That's protection, not against others but for your soul. You're learning that love doesn't require self-sacrifice. That loyalty doesn't mean self-betrayal. That maturity sometimes looks like walking your own road without asking everyone to follow. This is not isolation, it's sovereignty. And sovereignty brings peace. As you settle into this knowing, as you trust that you are supported even when the way forward feels unfamiliar, your energy changes. You stand a little straighter. You breathe a little deeper. You stop bracing for rejection that no longer has power over you. Because when you choose yourself with honesty, you are met with protection that cannot be shaken. And here's something beautiful. This support is not here to keep you hidden. It's here to prepare you. There is movement ahead, a new way of relating, a new sense of connection that doesn't cost you your truth. You don't have to see it all yet. You only have to trust what you're feeling now. That steadiness in your chest, that calm behind your decisions, that sense of being quietly held. Let that guide you. Because once fear releases its grip, the path ahead begins to reveal itself naturally. And that's where the next part of this story starts to take shape. Stay with me a little longer, Aries. This part asks for your honesty. Not with anyone else, just with yourself. Because when you begin to stand in your truth, something predictable happens. The past doesn't stay quiet. There is someone connected to that letter A who senses the shift before you say a word. They feel it in the distance. In the way you no longer explain yourself. In the way your energy doesn't reach for them like it used to. And when that happens, control often disguises itself as concern. You may notice emotions suddenly rise to the surface. Tears that appear out of nowhere. Stories that remind you of everything you owe. Everything you were given. Everything you might lose if you don't stay. Not because they are cruel, but because they are afraid. Afraid of losing access. Afraid of losing influence. Afraid of no longer being at the center of your decisions. So they pull on the softest threads. Guilt, responsibility, family duty, memory. And Aries, this is where your growth is tested. Because real love doesn't require you to feel trapped. It doesn't ask you to betray your own nervous system. It doesn't punish you for choosing peace. What you are sensing now is not love asking to be saved. It's control asking to be fed. And control becomes loud when it's losing power. You may see reactions you didn't expect. Strong emotions, defensiveness, sudden urgency. Not because you did something wrong, but because your boundaries are working. This is important. When you stop responding the way you used to, people who benefited from your old role will feel unsettled. That does not make you heartless. It makes you awake. You are not responsible for managing someone else's emotions at the cost of your own truth. You are not required to stay small to keep the peace. You are not obligated to repeat a pattern just because it's familiar. And here is the quiet truth. If you turn back now, not out of love but out of guilt, you will feel it immediately. That heaviness. That tightening in the chest, that sense of abandoning yourself all over again. This is why the message is simple, clear, steady. Do not turn around, not in anger, not in resentment, but in self-respect. You don't need to explain yourself endlessly. You don't need to prove your pain. You don't need to justify your growth. Silence, when chosen consciously, can be an act of healing. Let others react, let emotions pass, let the storm move through without stepping back into it. You are allowed to walk forward without dragging old dynamics behind you. And as you hold your ground, as you resist the urge to soften your truth just to make someone else comfortable, something inside you stabilizes. You feel stronger, calmer, more rooted in who you are now. This is not cruelty. It is clarity. And clarity is the doorway to freedom. What comes next is not punishment. It is relief. A lighter way of being. A different kind of connection. One that doesn't ask you to disappear in order to belong. So keep your eyes forward, Aries. Your heart open. Your spine straight. Because once you stop feeding what controls you, you create space for something that supports you. And that space, that quiet, brave space you are standing in now, is exactly where the next shift begins to form. Take a breath with me, Aries. Feel what happens when you finally stop holding the door open behind you. There is a moment after leaving, not dramatic, not loud, when the air changes. It feels lighter. almost unfamiliar, like stepping outside after a long storm and realizing you forgot what clean air smelled like. That's what happens when you walk away from what no longer fits. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. Something new begins to move toward you. You may not see it yet, but you feel it. Your shoulders drop, your breath deepens. Your thoughts stop looping back to the same old conversations. For the first time in a long while, you feel like yourself again. Not the version that had to explain. Not the version that had to compromise your fire. But the real you, quietly confident, grounded, alive. This is the energy shift. When one door closes honestly, another does not force itself open. It invites. It may arrive as a person. Someone who sees you without trying to shape you. Someone who feels safe without being possessive. Someone whose presence does not demand performance. Or it may arrive as a reconnection, a relationship reborn in a healthier form, with clearer boundaries, with mutual respect, with space to breathe. Or Aries, it may arrive as a completely different path altogether, a way of living that feels truer, a rhythm that matches your nervous system, a life that no longer asks you to fight just to exist. And here is something important, something you may have forgotten. You are creative, not just in obvious ways, but in the way you think, the way you problem solve, the way you imagine alternatives when others feel stuck. There was something you loved once, something you put down not because it stopped mattering, but because there was no room for it to grow around the people you were trying to please. A skill, a craft, an idea, a vision. It still knows your name. And now that your energy is no longer tied up in survival, that part of you begins to stir again. Not demanding, just waiting. This is where value starts to return to you. Not just emotional value, but tangible value. What you once dismissed as a hobby, what you were told was impractical, what you learned to minimize, holds more potential than you were ever allowed to explore. This is not about chasing money. It is about honoring worth. When you align with what feels authentic, support begins to show up in unexpected ways. Opportunities feel less forced. Decisions feel cleaner. Effort starts to return something back to you. And Aries, this is not luck. This is what happens when you stop pouring your energy into what drains you and start investing it where it can grow. You don't need to rush this. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to have it all figured out. Just notice the difference. The way your inner world feels quieter. The way your body responds with relief instead of resistance. That is your signal. You didn't lose anything by leaving. You made room. And what is moving toward you now is not here to take from you. It is here to meet you. So keep walking forward, gently, honestly. Because when you choose yourself without apology, life responds with doors you no longer have to push open. And one of those doors, the one you are approaching now, leads somewhere you can finally stay. Stay with me, Aries. Just for a few more breaths. There's a question hovering in the space around you now, not demanding an answer, just waiting for your honesty. Are you staying because it feels safe, or because you're afraid of what happens when you leave? You don't have to answer out loud. Your body already knows. You've reached a point where standing still costs more than moving forward. Where familiarity feels heavier than uncertainty. Where the old version of your life asks you to shrink, and the future asks you to trust yourself. This is not a dramatic moment. It's a grounded one. Real transformation rarely announces itself with noise. It arrives as clarity, as a quiet resolve, as a steady sense that you're done negotiating with what hurts. And here is something I want you to hear without distortion. There is no new life without endings. Not because endings are cruel, but because space must exist for something new to enter. The person tied to that letter A, they were never meant to be your destination. They were a catalyst, someone who triggered growth, who revealed where you were compromising yourself, who showed you what no longer works. And catalysts don't stay forever. They ignite change, then step back. You're not meant to carry them forward with you. You're meant to carry the lesson. This is where fear and respect part ways. Fear tells you to stay because you know the rules. Because you know how to survive there. Because leaving means trusting yourself fully. Respect tells you something else. It tells you that your soul deserves room. That your future deserves honesty. That your growth deserves movement. You are not abandoning anyone by choosing yourself. You are honoring the truth of who you are now. And Aries, you are not late. You are not behind. You are right on time. The version of you that had to crawl, to adapt, to endure, to survive has done its job. You are no longer that version. There is something different in your posture now, in your voice, in the way you hold silence. You are standing at the edge of becoming, not with chaos but with readiness. That is what prepared feels like. Prepared does not mean fearless. It means willing. Willing to trust what you've learned. Willing to step forward without needing guarantees. Willing to believe that you do not need to suffer to belong. You have outgrown the ground you were crawling on. And even if you don't fully see your wings yet, you feel them. In the way you breathe deeper. In the way you no longer argue with your intuition. In the way you stop chasing closure from people who cannot give it. This is not about proving anything. It is about choosing alignment. And alignment always brings peace before it brings proof. So as this story settles, as the noise fades, as the truth becomes simpler, hold on to this. You are allowed to choose freedom without apology. You are allowed to walk away without explanation. You are allowed to trust the version of yourself that survived enough to know better. The old ground does not need you anymore. And the sky ahead is not asking you to be perfect. Only present. Only honest. Only brave enough to take the first step. And Aries, you already have. So breathe, stand tall, and keep moving. The next chapter is not something you have to fight for. It is something you are finally ready to live. Alright, stay with me for a moment, Aries. Because before you go, there's something important I want to leave with you. If this message reached you tonight, it's not because you were searching, it's because you were ready. Ready to hear the truth without fear. Ready to feel without running. Ready to choose yourself without guilt. What you just listened to isn't a warning, it's a confirmation. A confirmation that you are no longer the person who stays quiet just to keep the peace. That you are no longer meant to live inside old roles, old expectations, old versions of love, and that choosing yourself was never selfish, it was necessary. If your heart felt heavy at times, that's okay. Healing doesn't always feel light at first. Sometimes it feels like recognition. Sometimes it feels like relief wrapped in tears. But notice this, you're still here. Still breathing. Still standing. That means you're stronger than the past that tried to define you. And Aries, you're not walking this path alone. There are others listening right now who felt the same pause in their chest. The same quiet yes inside. This is how community begins. Not with noise but with truth. So if this message resonated, let me know. Leave a comment. Even one word is enough. It helps this space find the people who need it most. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Not just for more readings but to remind yourself that growth is a journey, not a moment. Trust yourself, Aries. You didn't come this far to turn back now. The chapter ahead isn't about surviving. It's about living. With clarity, with courage, with your heart fully intact. Take this message with you. Let it settle. Let it guide you. Because the journey doesn't end here. The next message is already forming. And when it finds you, you'll understand exactly why. Until then, be gentle with yourself. Stand tall in your truth. And remember, you were always meant to rise.